The evening sky had turned a deep purple as Judge Anthony Washington gathered his papers from the courtroom bench. It had been a long day, 3 hearings back-to-back and a mountain of case files to review. Most of his colleagues had left hours ago, but that wasn't his style. In 15 years on the federal bench, he had built a reputation for thoroughness that earned him respect from both prosecutors and defense attorneys alike. "Heading out, Your Honor?" asked the court security officer, keys jingling in his hand. "Yes, finally," Washington replied with a tired smile. "Tell your daughter congratulations on her graduation. Georgetown, right?" The officer beamed. "You remembered. Thank you, Judge." These small connections mattered to Washington. Despite his position, he made it a point to know the people who worked in his courthouse, from the security staff to the cafeteria workers. His father, a postal worker for 40 years, had taught him that true character showed in how you treated everyone, not just those who could advance your career. The parking garage was nearly empty as Washington walked to his car, a modest, dark blue sedan that was practical and reliable, much like himself. Nothing flashy, nothing that screamed federal judge. He had always believed that humility kept you grounded, especially in a position of power. The drive home started like any other. Washington took his usual route through downtown, past the illuminated government buildings and toward the quiet suburb where he had lived for the past decade. The radio played soft jazz, his way of unwinding after a day of making decisions that affected people's lives. He was looking forward to a late dinner and perhaps finishing the biography he'd been reading on Thurgood Marshall. One of his lifelong heroes. The flashing blue and red lights appeared suddenly in his rearview mirror. Washington checked his speedometer. He was going exactly the speed limit. Perhaps he had a taillight out. He signaled and pulled over to the shoulder, following the routine he knew well. Hands visible on the steering wheel. Interior light on, calm demeanor. The officer approached slowly, flashlight beam sweeping across the interior of Washington's car before settling uncomfortably on his face. Something about the officer's posture immediately put Washington on alert. The stiff shoulders, the hand already resting on his holster. "License and registration," the officer demanded without preamble. No greeting, no explanation for the stop. "Good evening, officer," Washington said carefully, his voice measured and respectful. "May I ask why I've been pulled over?" The officer, whose nameplate read Officer Powell, narrowed his eyes. "I said license and registration now." Washington nodded, keeping his movements deliberate. "I'm going to reach for my wallet in my inside jacket pocket, okay?" Powell didn't respond, just watched with suspicious eyes as Washington slowly retrieved his identification. As the judge handed over his license and registration, he noticed Powell's expression change almost imperceptibly as he read the address, an affluent neighborhood that seemed to surprise him. "You live in Oakwood Heights?" Powell asked, a note of disbelief in his voice. "Yes, for about 10 years now," Washington replied evenly. Powell studied the license again, his flashlight beam moving between Washington's face and the ID photo. "This your car?" "Yes, it is." "Again, officer, could you please tell me why I've been pulled over?" Instead of answering, Powell circled the vehicle, shining his light into the windows. Washington sat patiently, though his heart rate had picked up. He had been in this situation before, too many times to count even after ascending to the federal bench. The robe didn't ride with you after hours. When Powell returned to the driver's window, his demeanor had hardened. "Step out of the vehicle." Washington felt a familiar knot form in his stomach. "Officer Powell, I've shown you my identification. I'm simply asking why I've been stopped." "You match a description we received." "Step out of the vehicle now." "A description of what?" "Don't make this difficult," Powell said, his hand moving back to his holster. "Out of the car." Washington took a deep breath. "Officer, I want to cooperate fully, but I need to understand what's happening." "I am Federal Judge Anthony Washington. You can verify." "I don't care if you're the president," Powell interrupted, his voice rising. "When an officer gives you an order, you comply. Now." Recognizing the dangerous direction this was heading, Washington carefully opened his door and stepped out. The night air was cool against his face as he stood to his full height, 6 feet even, dressed in a charcoal gray suit that now felt like inadequate armor. "Hands where I can see them," Powell barked, despite Washington's hands being clearly visible at his sides. Turn around, face the vehicle. Officer, this is unnecessary, Washington said calmly. If you'd just tell me. Powell moved with sudden speed, grabbing Washington's arm and roughly spinning him to face the car. The judge's chest pressed against the cool metal of his sedan as Powell kicked his feet wider apart. I'm complying. Officer, Washington said, his voice still level despite the adrenaline now coursing through him. But I need to know why I'm being detained. We had reports of drug activity in this area, Powell said vaguely. Vehicle matching this description. Washington almost laughed at the absurdity. His 4-year-old sedan was about as nondescript as vehicles came. My car is a standard model driven by thousands of people. That's hardly specific. He felt Powell stiffen behind him. You calling me a liar? No, officer. I'm simply pointing out. Because it sounds like you're questioning my authority, Powell continued, pressing Washington harder against the car. And that's not how this works. A passing car slowed, its headlights illuminating the scene. Washington noticed 2 young people inside, their faces concerned as they witnessed what was happening. They pulled over about 50 feet ahead. Officer, Washington tried again. Those people are recording this interaction. I would appreciate it if you would conduct yourself professionally and explain why you've detained me. Powell glanced at the stopped car, momentarily distracted. In that moment, Washington carefully reached into his suit pocket. What are you reaching for? Powell shouted, yanking Washington's arm. My judicial identification, Washington replied steadily. It's in my pocket. I'm trying to show you who I am. Hands on the car, Powell demanded, slapping Washington's hand away. The leather wallet fell to the ground, its contents spilling out. Among them was the gold judicial badge and ID card that Washington carried. Powell's flashlight beam found the badge on the asphalt. For a moment he froze, then quickly bent to retrieve it. Washington remained still, hands pressed against his car, aware of the witnesses watching and possibly recording. This says you're a federal judge, Powell said, his voice suddenly uncertain. Yes, as I've been trying to tell you, Washington replied. I'm Judge Anthony Washington, United States District Court. Powell studied the ID card, then looked up at Washington with new eyes, not apologetic, but recalculating. You could have said that from the beginning. I attempted to several times, Washington pointed out. And I'm still waiting to hear why I was pulled over. Instead of answering, Powell spoke into his radio. Dispatch, I need to verify an ID. He read off Washington's judicial identification number. While they waited for confirmation, the atmosphere remained tense. Washington could feel Powell's embarrassment morphing into something more dangerous. Pride wounded. Authority challenged and now facing potential consequences. A young officer arrived as backup, pulling up behind Powell's patrol car. As he approached, his eyes widened in recognition. Judge Washington, the young officer said, surprise evident in his voice. Officer Chen, Washington nodded, recognizing the officer who had testified in his courtroom just last month in a federal case. Powell looked between them, his face flushing. You know him? Sir, that's Judge Washington, Chen said quietly. He presided over the Riverside trafficking case. The radio crackled to life, confirming what Chen had already verified. Anthony Washington was indeed a federal judge with 15 years on the bench. Powell's demeanor shifted instantly, but not in the way one might expect. Rather than apologizing, his face hardened with anger and embarrassment. He took a step toward Washington, who still stood with his hands on his car. So you think your position means you get special treatment? Powell demanded. That the law doesn't apply to you? On the contrary, Washington replied calmly. I expect the law to be applied equally and fairly to everyone, which is why I'm still waiting to hear why I was stopped. The confrontation might have escalated further, but Officer Chen stepped between them. Sir, he said to Powell, may I speak with you for a moment? As the two officers conferred in hushed tones a few feet away, Washington finally lowered his hands from the car. His shoulder ached where Powell had grabbed him. The witnesses in the other car were still watching, their phones still apparently recording. Washington straightened his suit jacket, maintaining his dignity, despite the humiliation of being forced against his car like a criminal. He had experienced this kind of treatment before becoming a judge, but he had hoped those days were behind him. Clearly they were not. Officer Chen approached him alone. Judge Washington, I apologize for this misunderstanding. You're free to go, sir. Misunderstanding? Washington echoed. Is that what we're calling racial profiling now, Officer Chen? Chen had the decency to look uncomfortable. Sir, Where's Officer Powell going? Washington asked, noticing the other officer returning to his patrol car. He's been instructed to return to the station, Chen explained. His shift supervisor is on the way. Washington nodded, taking a deep breath. I'll be waiting here to speak with them. Chen looked surprised. You don't have to do that, sir. You can file a complaint tomorrow if you wish. I'm aware of my options, Washington said firmly, but I think it's important this is addressed immediately. Don't you? As Chen stepped away to radio the update, Washington looked toward the witnesses who had stopped to record the incident. He gave them a small nod of thanks. Their presence may have prevented this situation from becoming much worse. Within minutes, more patrol cars began arriving at the scene, their lights painting the roadside in alternating blue and red. What had started as a routine traffic stop, though one without cause, was about to become something none of them expected. And as the shift supervisor's car pulled up, Washington stood tall, determined that what happened next would shock everyone involved. Not because of his anger or demands for retribution, but because of what he was about to propose instead. The blue and red lights from the gathering police vehicles lit up the night street like a silent alarm. Judge Washington stood tall beside his car, watching as a silver SUV pulled up and parked. The door opened, and a woman in a police captain's uniform stepped out. Her name badge read Captain Rodriguez. Washington recognized her immediately from several community policing forums he had attended over the years. She had a reputation for being tough but fair, someone who didn't tolerate misconduct within her ranks. Their paths had crossed professionally, though they weren't close acquaintances. Captain Rodriguez surveyed the scene. 3 police cruisers, the witnesses still parked up ahead, Officer Chen looking uncomfortable, and Officer Powell sitting in his patrol car visibly fuming. Her eyes finally settled on Washington. Judge Washington, she said, approaching with an extended hand. I was informed of the situation. Are you all right, sir? Washington accepted the handshake. Physically, yes, but I'm concerned about what just happened here. As am I, she replied, her expression grave. Officer Chen briefed me on his arrival, but I'd like to hear your account directly. Washington recounted the events, the unexplained stop, Powell's aggressive behavior, the refusal to listen when he identified himself as a judge. He spoke calmly, sticking to facts rather than interpretations. At no point was I told why I was pulled over, he concluded. And when my judicial ID fell to the ground instead of apologizing, Officer Powell became even more hostile. Rodriguez listened without interrupting, her face growing more troubled with each detail. When Washington finished, she nodded once. Judge, I want to personally apologize for this incident. This is not how our officers are trained to conduct themselves. She looked toward Powell's car. I'd like to review the body camera footage immediately. I would appreciate that, Washington replied. Rodriguez turned to Officer Chen. Set up the mobile terminal. I want to see that footage now, not back at the station. Chen hurried to comply, opening his laptop in his patrol car. Rodriguez turned back to Washington. Would you join me, Your Honor? I'd like you to see this as well. Washington followed her to Chen's vehicle, where a small screen displayed the loading body camera system. The young couple who had been watching from their car approached cautiously. Excuse me, the young woman called. We recorded what happened. Would that be helpful? Rodriguez looked at them. Very much so. Officer Chen will take your information and a copy of your video. Thank you for stopping. While Chen spoke with the witnesses, Rodriguez and Washington watched as Powell's body camera footage began to play. The camera had captured everything, Powell following Washington's car for several blocks before activating his lights. The aggressive approach, the demand for identification without explanation, and the escalation despite Washington's calm compliance. Most damning was the moment just before he activated his lights, when Powell's voice could be heard saying to himself, "Let's see what this guy is doing in this neighborhood." Rodriguez's jaw tightened as they continued watching. When they reached the part where Powell discovered Washington was a federal judge, his body camera captured him muttering under his breath, "These people always think they're above the law." The footage continued, showing Powell's increasing aggression until Chen arrived. At one point, Powell moved toward Washington with his hand on his baton, a moment Washington himself hadn't fully registered in the heat of the situation. Rodriguez stopped the playback, her expression now cold with anger. "Judge Washington, I've seen enough. This stops now." She strode toward Powell's patrol car and opened the door. "Officer Powell, step out." Powell emerged, standing at attention but with defiance in his eyes. "Your badge and your weapon," Rodriguez demanded, holding out her hand. "Captain, with all due respect," Powell began. "That wasn't a request," she cut him off. "Badge and weapon. Now. You're on administrative leave pending a full investigation." Powell's face flushed red. "Because some judge complained?" "He was in a high-crime area." "I was doing my job." "High-crime area?" Washington couldn't help but interject. "I was on my way home from the federal courthouse on the main road that I take every day." Rodriguez turned to Powell. "The judge's home address is in Oakwood Heights. That's where he was heading. Are you suggesting Oakwood Heights is a high-crime area?" Powell fell silent, knowing full well that Oakwood Heights was one of the safest neighborhoods in the city. "Your body camera footage contradicts your statement," Rodriguez continued, "and I won't tolerate officers who abuse their authority or who profile citizens based on race." "I didn't." Powell started to protest. "We heard what you said before you pulled him over," Rodriguez interrupted. "It's all on camera." Powell's shoulders slumped slightly as he realized the extent of the evidence against him. Slowly, he unholstered his weapon and removed his badge, placing both in Rodriguez's outstretched hand. "Report to Internal Affairs tomorrow at 9 a.m., she instructed. "Officer Diaz will drive you back to the station now." As another officer led Powell away, Rodriguez turned back to Washington. "Judge, I know this doesn't erase what happened, but I want you to know we take this extremely seriously." "I appreciate that, Captain," Washington replied. "But I'm not just concerned about myself. If this is how Officer Powell treats a federal judge, how does he treat others who don't have my position or resources?" Rodriguez nodded grimly. "That's precisely my concern as well. We'll be reviewing all of Officer Powell's stops and arrests from the past year." The young couple who had witnessed the incident approached again, having given their video to Officer Chen. "Judge Washington?" the young man said hesitantly. "We just wanted to say we're sorry this happened to you. We posted the video online already. People should know." Washington gave them a thoughtful look. "What are your names?" "I'm Tyler," the young man replied. "This is my girlfriend, Ling." "Tyler and Ling, thank you for stopping. Your video may be important evidence, but more than that, your presence here tonight mattered. Witnesses can make all the difference in situations like these." They nodded, seeming to understand the weight of what he was saying. As they walked back to their car, Washington turned to Captain Rodriguez. "I'd like to file a formal complaint tonight, not just for myself, but as part of the official record." "Of course," Rodriguez agreed. "We can take your statement at the station, or if you prefer, an officer can come to your home tomorrow." Washington considered this. His shoulder ached where Powell had grabbed him, and exhaustion from the long day was setting in. But he knew from experience that momentum mattered in cases like this. Delays could lead to details being forgotten or narratives being changed. "I'll come to the station now," he decided. "I want this documented while everything is fresh." As they prepared to leave, Washington noticed Officer Chen standing nearby looking troubled. "Officer Chen," Washington called him over. "You did the right thing tonight. Speaking up isn't always easy, especially against another officer." Chen nodded, his expression serious. "Thank you, sir. But I should have done more sooner. When I arrived and saw how Officer Powell was treating you, you intervened," Washington assured him. "That matters." Rodriguez, who had been speaking with another officer, rejoined them. "Judge Washington, before we head to the station, there's something else you should know." Her expression was grim as she continued. "This isn't the first complaint against Officer Powell. There have been 3 others in the past 18 months, all alleging similar conduct, all filed by Black or Hispanic drivers." Washington's eyes narrowed. "And yet he was still on patrol?" Rodriguez looked genuinely troubled. "The previous complaints were handled differently. Before I took command of this precinct." "Buried, you mean?" Washington said flatly. Rodriguez didn't deny it. The system protected him. But not anymore, not after tonight. Washington absorbed this information, feeling a familiar weight settle on his shoulders, the weight of responsibility that came with being in a position to actually change things. "Captain," he said after a moment, "before we go to the station, I'd like to make a call. Rodriguez nodded. Of course. Washington stepped away and dialed a number on his phone. After 2 rings, a voice answered. District Attorney Patel speaking. Harish, it's Anthony Washington, he said. I need to talk to you about something important. It can't wait until morning. As Washington briefly explained the situation, he watched the officers moving around the scene, securing evidence, taking statements from the witnesses. He saw Captain Rodriguez reviewing more footage on the patrol car computer, her face set in determination. What had happened to him tonight was not unique, far from it. But his position gave him a platform and resources that most victims of police misconduct didn't have, and he intended to use them. Yes, he said into the phone, answering the district attorney's question. I'm filing a formal complaint tonight, but I want to discuss something larger. This isn't just about one officer or one incident. As he spoke, Washington made a decision. This wouldn't be handled the way these things usually were, with quiet settlements and officers moving to different departments. Not this time. I'll see you at the station in 30 minutes, he told the DA. And Harish, bring the forms for establishing a special task force. We're going to need one. Washington ended the call and walked back to Captain Rodriguez, who was waiting by her vehicle. Ready, Your Honor? She asked. Washington nodded, a new resolve hardening within him. Yes, Captain. I believe I am. As they drove away from the scene, Washington looked out the window at the city streets passing by. The same streets where just an hour ago he had been treated like a criminal despite his position and accomplishments. The same streets where countless others faced similar treatment, or worse, every day. What would happen next would indeed shock everyone involved. Because Judge Anthony Washington wasn't just filing a complaint, he was about to use every tool at his disposal to ensure that what happened to him tonight would lead to real, lasting change. The police station buzzed with unusual activity for this late hour. Word had spread quickly that a federal judge had been mistreated during a traffic stop, and the normal rhythm of the precinct had been disrupted. Officers spoke in hushed tones as Judge Washington sat in Captain Rodriguez's office, a cup of untouched coffee cooling on the desk before him. District Attorney Harish Patel arrived within 20 minutes of Washington's call, briefcase in hand and concern etched on his face. He had worked with Washington on numerous federal cases over the years and held him in high regard, not just for his legal mind, but for his fairness and integrity. Anthony, Patel said as he entered the office, shaking Washington's hand firmly. I came as soon as I could. Are you all right? I'm fine, Harish, Washington assured him, though the dull ache in his shoulder suggested otherwise. But we have serious issues to address. Captain Rodriguez introduced herself to the DA, then gestured for everyone to sit. I've just finished reviewing all of Officer Powell's body camera footage from the incident, she said. It's worse than I initially thought. How so? Patel asked. There's a 2-minute conversation Powell had with another officer before he began following Judge Washington's vehicle. It strongly suggests this wasn't a random stop but targeted harassment. She turned her computer monitor so both men could see and played a clip. In it, Powell could be heard talking to another officer at a convenience store just before the incident. Watch this, Powell said on the recording. Guy in a suit driving through here this time of night? Something's not right. Bet he's looking to score. The other officer seemed uncomfortable. Man, you can't just stop someone for driving while black in a suit. Watch me, Powell replied before walking back to his patrol car. Patel's expression darkened as the clip ended. That's textbook racial profiling recorded on his own body camera. There's more, Rodriguez continued. I've pulled Powell's stop records for the past year. He's made 637 traffic stops. Over 80% were minorities, primarily black drivers. The department average is closer to 30%, which aligns with our local demographics. Washington listened, his judicial mind already cataloging the evidence, building a case. And the complaints you mentioned? Rodriguez pulled out a folder. 3 formal complaints in 18 months, all alleging aggressive behavior, unnecessary escalation, and racial bias. All were dismissed due to insufficient evidence by the previous captain. Where are those complainants now? Washington asked. One moved away, Rodriguez replied, checking her notes. One withdrew his complaint after, according to the record, further consideration. And the third? She hesitated. The third what? Patel pressed. The third was arrested 2 months after filing his complaint. Drug possession. Currently serving a 3-year sentence. The implication hung heavy in the air. Washington and Patel exchanged knowing glances. "I want to see that arrest report," Washington said, "and I want to know which judge handled that case." Rodriguez nodded. "I'll get those files, but there's something else you should know." She closed the folder and looked directly at Washington. "Powell has been with the department for 9 years. He's been transferred 3 times. Each transfer followed similar patterns of complaints, so the department just kept moving the problem," Patel concluded. "Until it landed in my precinct," Rodriguez agreed, her voice tight with controlled anger. "And now we have him on camera assaulting a federal judge." The door opened and Officer Chen entered with a tablet. "Captain, sorry to interrupt, but the witness's video has gone viral. It's already got over 20,000 views and major news outlets are picking it up." Rodriguez took the tablet, and the 3 of them watched the bystander video that Tyler and Ling had recorded. From their angle across the street, Powell's aggression was even more apparent. The shove that pushed Washington against his car, the threatening stance, and most damning of all, the moment. Powell struck Washington with his baton when he tried to reach for his fallen ID. The blow had been quick but unmistakable, a sharp strike to Washington's shoulder that had sent him stumbling against his car. In the chaos of the moment, Washington had registered it as a push, but the video clearly showed the baton making contact. "He hit you," Patel said, his voice low with shock. "Anthony, that's assault." Washington touched his shoulder, the bruise now making more sense. "So it seems." Rodriguez set the tablet down, her decision made. "I'm moving forward with criminal charges. Assault, abuse of power, civil rights violations. This isn't just an internal matter anymore." "That's what I wanted to discuss," Washington said, leaning forward. "This incident presents an opportunity, not just to address one officer's misconduct, but to create meaningful change." He stood and began to pace, his judicial demeanor giving way to passionate advocacy. "How many others has this happened to? People without my credentials, without witnesses recording, without the ability to fight back through the system? This isn't just about Officer Powell or even just this department. It's about patterns of behavior that persist because the system allows them to." Patel nodded. "What are you proposing?" "A special task force," Washington replied. "Independent oversight with real authority, not just for this incident, but to review all cases where officers have multiple complaints or suspicious patterns in their records." Rodriguez considered this. That would require cooperation from the police union, the mayor's office, and the courts, Washington finished. "Which is where I come in. I'm willing to be the public face of this effort. My position gives us leverage we wouldn't otherwise have." "You understand what you're taking on?" Patel asked carefully. "The backlash could be significant. Some will accuse you of using your position to pursue a personal vendetta." "Let them," Washington replied firmly. "I'd rather face criticism than know I had the chance to create real change and did nothing." A knock at the door interrupted them. A young officer entered with a concerned expression.
"Captain, there's a crowd gathering outside."
Press, community activists, some city council members. They're asking for a statement about the incident with Judge Washington. Rodriguez checked her watch, nearly midnight. "Tell them we'll have a statement in the morning." "Actually," Washington said, "I'd like to address them briefly." Both Rodriguez and Patel looked surprised. "Are you sure that's wise?" Patel asked. "Without preparation, without a clear strategy, sometimes the most powerful statements are the unplanned ones," Washington replied. "The public needs to see that we're taking immediate action, not hiding behind closed doors." After a moment's consideration, Rodriguez nodded. "It's your call, Judge." Minutes later, Washington stood on the steps of the police station, facing a crowd that had grown to nearly 100 people despite the late hour. Camera lights illuminated the scene as reporters pushed microphones forward. Behind him stood Captain Rodriguez and District Attorney Patel, a visible show of unified purpose. Washington raised his hand, and the crowd quieted. "My name is Judge Anthony Washington," he began, his deep voice carrying across the gathered crowd. "Earlier tonight I was pulled over, physically assaulted and mistreated by a police officer while driving home from work. I was given no reason for being stopped. When I identified myself as a federal judge, the situation only escalated. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. I stand before you tonight not just as a judge, but as a citizen who experienced firsthand what too many in our community have faced for too long. The difference is that my position gives me a voice and resources that others may not have." He gestured to Rodriguez and Patel beside him. "Captain Rodriguez has already taken swift action. The officer involved has been placed on administrative leave pending criminal charges. But this isn't enough. One incident, one officer, one disciplinary action. These won't solve the underlying problems." The crowd grew still, hanging on his words. "Therefore, I am announcing the formation of a special task force to review police practices, complaint procedures, and accountability measures. This task force will have representatives from law enforcement, the courts, and most importantly, the communities most affected by these issues." A reporter called out, "Judge Washington, will you be filing a lawsuit against the department?" Washington shook his head. "No, I'm not interested in financial compensation or personal retribution. What happened to me was wrong, but using my experience to create systemic change will be far more valuable than any settlement." Another voice from the crowd. "Why should we believe anything will change this time?" It was a fair question, Washington acknowledged. "Because this time we have irrefutable evidence. We have leadership willing to acknowledge the problem." He gestured to Rodriguez. "And we have the commitment of people in positions of power to see this through, myself included." He paused, then added, "The task force's findings and recommendations will be made public. Nothing hidden, nothing buried. Complete transparency." As Washington concluded his impromptu press conference, he noticed Officer Powell's partner, the one from the body camera footage who had expressed discomfort with Powell's intentions, standing at the edge of the crowd. Their eyes met briefly and Washington saw something he hadn't expected: relief. Later, as Washington finally prepared to leave the station, that same officer approached him hesitantly. "Judge Washington?" "Officer Ramirez," he introduced himself. "I just wanted to say, thank you." "For what?" Washington asked. Ramirez lowered his voice. "For doing this the right way. Some of us have been trying to speak up about Powell and others like him for years. But the system—" He trailed off. "The system protected them," Washington finished. Ramirez nodded. "Not anymore, it seems." As Washington finally drove home in the early hours of the morning, his shoulder throbbing and exhaustion settling deep in his bones, he reflected on Officer Ramirez's words. The system had indeed protected bad actors for too long. But systems could be changed, rebuilt, reformed, reimagined, and sometimes, all it took was the right person in the wrong situation to set that change in motion. As he pulled into his driveway, his phone buzzed with a text from D.A. Patel. "Task force paperwork filed. Press conference tomorrow at 10 a.m. This is just the beginning." Washington smiled tiredly. Yes, it was just the beginning. What would happen next would truly shock everyone, most of all the officer who had made the mistake of pulling over the wrong judge on the wrong night. 3 days after the incident, Judge Washington sat in his chambers reviewing the growing stack of files on his desk. The bruise on his shoulder had darkened to a deep purple, a physical reminder of that night. His phone hadn't stopped ringing. Calls from national news outlets, civil rights organizations, and politicians all wanting statements or interviews. He had declined most, focusing instead on the work ahead. A knock at his door interrupted his thoughts. His clerk, a bright young law school graduate named Luis, poked his head in. "Judge, the task force members are all here for the first meeting." Washington nodded, gathering his papers. "Thank you, Luis, and any word on the case file I requested?" "Just arrived this morning," Luis replied, placing another folder on top of the stack. "The drug possession case against the third complainant. Judge Franklin's chambers sent it over with his compliments." Washington added it to his briefcase. "Let's not keep everyone waiting then." The conference room down the hall from his chambers had been set up for the meeting. As Washington entered, the dozen people seated around the table fell silent. He had carefully selected this group over the past 72 hours, choosing representatives from various stakeholders in the community. Captain Rodriguez was there, along with D.A. Patel. Officer Chen had been included at Washington's specific request. The police union had sent a representative, a stern-faced lieutenant named Grayson who looked as if he'd rather be anywhere else. From the community, Washington had selected local leaders, including a pastor from the city's largest black church, the director of a Hispanic community center, and a civil liberties attorney. Most surprising to some was the presence of Tyler and Ling, the young couple who had recorded the incident. Washington had tracked them down and personally asked them to participate, believing their perspective as ordinary citizens who witnessed and documented police misconduct was invaluable. "Thank you all for coming," Washington began, taking his seat at the head of the table. "What we're undertaking here is not a witch hunt against the police department, nor is it a symbolic gesture to appease public outrage. Our goal is concrete, lasting reform." He opened his briefcase and distributed copies of an agenda. "Before we discuss Officer Powell's case specifically, I want to share some information that illustrates why this task force is necessary." Washington pulled out the additional file Luis had just given him. "This is the case file for Michael Thompson, the third person who filed a complaint against Officer Powell. 2 months after his complaint, he was arrested for drug possession during a traffic stop. That stop was conducted by Officer Powell and his partner. The police union representative, Lieutenant Grayson, shifted uncomfortably. That's not unusual. If an officer has previous contact with an individual, I'm not finished," Washington said calmly but firmly. Mr. Thompson was sentenced to 3 years by Judge Franklin. What's notable is that the only evidence was Officer Powell's testimony and a small amount of marijuana that was allegedly found in the vehicle's center console, a vehicle that, according to the report, belonged to Thompson's employer. Washington looked around the table. What's even more concerning is that Thompson's lawyer filed a motion to review the body camera footage, but was told the camera had malfunctioned during that specific stop. Captain Rodriguez frowned. "That should have triggered an automatic investigation." "It did not," Washington continued. "The motion was denied, and Thompson went to prison on Powell's word alone." The room fell silent as the implications sank in. "Are you suggesting Officer Powell planted evidence?" Lieutenant Grayson asked, his voice tight. "I'm not suggesting anything yet," Washington replied. "I'm presenting facts that warrant investigation, and this is just one case. There are dozens more with similar patterns." He pulled out another set of documents. "These are records of every traffic stop Officer Powell made in the past 3 years. The racial disparity is striking, but what's more concerning is the number of arrests that followed complaints against him. It suggests a pattern of retribution. This goes beyond one bad officer," the civil liberties attorney noted. "This suggests systemic failures in oversight and accountability." Washington nodded. "Exactly. Which is why our task force needs to examine not just individual behavior, but the processes that enable it." He turned to Rodriguez. "Captain, can you update us on Officer Powell's current status?" Rodriguez straightened in her chair. "Officer Powell has been formally charged with assault, official misconduct, and civil rights violations. He's currently suspended without pay pending trial. The DA's office has taken over the investigation to avoid any appearance of conflict." DA Patel picked up the thread. "We've assigned our top prosecutor to the case. The evidence is overwhelming, between the body camera footage, the witness video, and Judge Washington's testimony." "What's Powell saying about all this?" the pastor asked. "He's claiming he followed proper procedure," Patel replied. "That he felt threatened when Judge Washington reached for his pocket, despite the judge clearly stating he was retrieving his ID. His union lawyer is trying to frame this as an unfortunate misunderstanding, rather than misconduct." Lieutenant Grayson cleared his throat. "With all due respect, we need to be careful about rushing to judgment. Police officers make split-second decisions in potentially dangerous situations. I was unarmed, compliant, and clearly identified myself," Washington interrupted, his usual judicial reserve slipping momentarily. "The body camera footage shows Officer Powell following me for blocks before finding a pretext to pull me over. This wasn't a split-second decision. It was targeted harassment." The room grew tense until Tyler, who had been quiet until now, spoke up. "Can I say something?" he asked hesitantly. When Washington nodded, he continued. "The night this happened, Ling and I were driving home from a movie. We saw the police lights and slowed down, just curious at first. But the way that officer was treating you, it was scary. Not just because of what he was doing, but because it felt, normal. Like this is just what happens." Ling nodded in agreement. "We've both seen friends get pulled over for no reason. But seeing it happen to a judge made us realize no one is immune. That's why we started recording." Washington looked at the young couple with appreciation, and that recording has become key evidence. "Which brings me to another proposal for this task force: civilian oversight of police interactions. He outlined his idea, a program encouraging citizens to safely document police activities, combined with a transparent review process for that documentation. When officers know they're being watched and recorded, behavior changes. Accountability increases. You're basically asking civilians to spy on police, Lieutenant Grayson objected. I'm asking for transparency, Washington countered. Officers who are doing their jobs properly have nothing to fear from being recorded. Officer Chen, who had been quiet until now, spoke up. Speaking as an officer on the street, most of us don't mind being recorded. We're already on body cameras. The ones who object are usually the ones with something to hide. Grayson shot Chen a look that suggested this conversation would continue later, away from the task force. Washington noticed the exchange and made a mental note to ensure Chen was protected from any departmental backlash. Good officers who spoke up needed to be supported, not punished. The meeting continued for 2 hours, with the group identifying key areas for reform: the complaint process, body camera policies, disciplinary procedures, and community engagement. By the end, they had drafted an ambitious but achievable roadmap for change. As the meeting wrapped up, Captain Rodriguez approached Washington. Judge, there's something else you should know. We've been contacted by 3 more individuals who say they experienced similar treatment from Officer Powell. They didn't file formal complaints because they didn't think they'd be believed. But now they're coming forward, Washington observed. Your case has given them courage, Rodriguez confirmed. And there's more. Other officers are starting to speak up about problems they've witnessed. It's like a dam breaking. Washington absorbed this information, feeling both vindicated and sobered by the scope of the problems they were uncovering. Keep me updated on every new development. As the room emptied, D.A. Patel lingered behind. Anthony, I've been looking into Powell's history more deeply. He didn't start his career here. He transferred from departments in 3 different states each time after similar complaints surfaced. He's been running from his record, Washington realized. Exactly, and someone's been helping him do it, providing recommendations, cleaning up his file. We're not just dealing with one rogue officer. There's a network that protects officers like him, helps them move around when things get too hot. Washington's expression darkened. Then we need to expose that network too. No stone unturned, Harish. After everyone had gone, Washington remained in the conference room, looking over his notes. His phone buzzed with a text from his wife. Dinner's waiting when you get home. How did it go? He texted back, making progress. Be home soon. As he packed up his materials, Washington's clerk Luis appeared at the door. Judge, sorry to interrupt, but Officer Powell's lawyer is here. He's requesting a private meeting with you. Washington raised an eyebrow. That's highly inappropriate given the circumstances. What exactly does he want? He says he has a settlement offer that would benefit everyone involved, Luis replied, clearly uncomfortable with the message he was delivering. Washington considered this for a moment. Tell him I'll give him 5 minutes, but in the main courtroom, not my chambers. And I want you to sit in as a witness. Minutes later, Washington sat at his bench in the empty courtroom as Powell's lawyer. A slick man in an expensive suit named Raymond Barker stood before him. Thank you for seeing me, Judge Washington, Barker began. My client recognizes that this situation has become complicated. We're prepared to offer a solution that would allow everyone to move forward without further disruption. I'm listening, Washington said neutrally. Officer Powell will accept a 30-day suspension and mandatory sensitivity training. In return, we ask that you drop your criminal complaint and issue a joint statement, acknowledging that while mistakes were made, there was no malicious intent. Washington stared at the lawyer in disbelief. Mr. Barker, your client assaulted me on camera after racially profiling me. There are potentially dozens of other victims who suffered similar or worse treatment.
And you're offering sensitivity training?
Barker's smile tightened. Judge, we both know how these things typically play out. Lengthy trials, appeals, years of litigation with uncertain outcomes. No one wins in that scenario. Except justice, Washington replied, and accountability. Be reasonable, Barker pressed. Officer Powell has a family. A mortgage. 15 years until retirement. So did Michael Thompson, Washington said, the man your client apparently framed after he filed a complaint. Thompson is sitting in prison while Officer Powell worried about his mortgage. Barker's expression changed, becoming harder. You're making a mistake, Judge. The police union stands behind Officer Powell. This crusade of yours won't just affect him. It could damage police morale citywide. Think about the potential consequences for public safety. Washington stood, his full height and presence commanding the courtroom. Mr. Barker, that sounded remarkably like a threat. Let me be absolutely clear. There will be no settlement, no deals. Officer Powell will face the full consequences of his actions, as will anyone who enabled or covered for him. He stepped down from the bench. Your 5 minutes are up. I suggest you prepare a better defense for your client than intimidation tactics. He's going to need it. As Barker left, Washington exchanged a look with Luis, who had witnessed the entire exchange. Make sure that conversation is documented, Washington instructed, word for word. What had started as one incident on a dark street was growing into something much larger. A reckoning that would shock not just one department or one city, but potentially reshape policing practices across the country. And despite the pressure and backlash, Judge Anthony Washington had never been more certain of any cause in his life. 3 months had passed since that fateful night, when Officer Powell had pulled Judge Washington over. The city had transformed in ways few could have predicted. What began as one incident had sparked a movement for police accountability that had spread far beyond their community. On a bright Tuesday morning, Washington stood at the podium in the police academy's main auditorium. Before him sat 200 officers, the entire force, arranged by Captain Rodriguez to attend mandatory training on the new policies developed by the task force. Good morning, Washington began, surveying the sea of uniforms before him. Some faces were open and attentive, others guarded or skeptical. 3 months ago, I was driving home from work when I was pulled over, assaulted and mistreated by one of your colleagues. Today, I'm here not as a victim, but as a partner in creating meaningful change. He gestured to the thick booklets that had been distributed to each officer. The reforms outlined in these materials weren't created to punish you or make your jobs harder. They were designed to restore trust between police and the communities you serve, trust that has been broken over many years. Through many incidents, Washington stepped away from the podium, preferring to walk along the edge of the stage as he spoke. I've spent the last 12 weeks listening to all sides of this issue. I've heard from officers who feel unfairly blamed for the actions of a few. I've heard from community members who feel targeted and unsafe. And I've heard from those caught in the middle, trying to do the right thing in a broken system. In the front row, Captain Rodriguez nodded slightly, encouraging him to continue. Beside her sat Officer Chen, recently promoted to sergeant and now heading a new community relations unit. The task force's work had already led to concrete changes in department leadership, promoting officers who demonstrated both competence and compassion. The new accountability measures are straightforward, Washington continued. Body cameras will now upload footage automatically, without the ability to delete or edit. Civilian complaints will be reviewed by an independent board that includes community representatives, and officers with multiple complaints will undergo review before those complaints become patterns. He paused, making eye contact with various officers. But the most important change isn't in policy. It's in culture. The blue wall of silence protected Officer Powell for years while he abused his power. That stops now. Washington gestured to the side of the stage where Michael Thompson now stood. This is Michael Thompson. Until last month, he was serving a 3-year sentence based on evidence that we now know was planted by Officer Powell in retaliation for a complaint Mr. Thompson filed. His conviction has been overturned, his record expunged, and he has received a formal apology from this department. Thompson, a slender man in his 30s, nodded solemnly to the assembled officers. His presence spoke volumes about Washington's approach to reform, not just changing policies, but making amends for past injustices. Mr. Thompson is just one of 17 cases we've identified where Officer Powell appears to have abused his authority. Each of these cases is being reviewed. Each of these individuals deserves justice. Washington turned a page in his notes. Now, some of you may be wondering about Officer Powell himself. The room tensed noticeably. Powell's case had become nationally known, a lightning rod in discussions about police accountability. Last week, Officer Powell agreed to a plea deal. He will serve 18 months in prison for his actions, surrender his law, enforcement certification permanently, and cooperate with ongoing investigations into similar misconduct by other officers. Murmurs spread through the audience. The sentence was unprecedented. Police officers rarely faced serious consequences, even for egregious misconduct. What many of you don't know, Washington continued, is that the evidence against Powell was so overwhelming that his own union lawyer advised him to take the deal. When the wall of silence cracked, dozens of witnesses came forward, fellow officers, former trainees, civilians, all with similar stories about his behavior. Washington walked back to the podium, his expression grave. The most troubling discovery was the network of supervisors and administrators who enabled Powell's behavior. 3 senior officials have resigned. 2 more are under investigation. This wasn't just about one bad officer. It was about a system that protected him at the expense of the public and honest officers alike. At the back of the room, Lieutenant Grayson shifted uncomfortably. He had been among those who resigned rather than face investigation. Washington pretended not to notice him. This wasn't about personal vindication. But today isn't about dwelling on what went wrong, Washington said, his tone shifting. It's about building something better. The reforms we're implementing here are already being studied by departments across the country. What happened in our city could become a model for national change. Washington gestured toward the side doors as they opened. To help implement these changes, I've invited some special guests to join our training program. Tyler and Ling entered, along with a dozen other community members of various ages and backgrounds. These individuals represent the communities you serve. Over the next week, they'll share their experiences and perspectives. They're not here as adversaries, but as essential partners in building a safer city for everyone. The atmosphere in the room had changed, tension giving way to something like cautious hope. Even the most skeptical officers seemed to be listening more attentively. I know change is difficult, Washington acknowledged. Some of you may resent these new policies or see them as obstacles, but I ask you to consider this. How many good officers lost faith in the system because they saw misconduct go unpunished? How many left the force because they couldn't be part of a culture that protected wrongdoers? These reforms aren't just for the community. They're for you too. For the officers who want to serve with integrity and honor. As Washington concluded his prepared remarks, he noticed a hand raised in the middle of the audience. It belonged to an older officer with gray at his temples. Yes, officer? Diaz, sir. 23 years on the force. The man stood, his expression thoughtful. I appreciate what you're trying to do here, Judge Washington. But I have to ask, why didn't you just sue the department? You could have won millions, made a statement that way. Why go through all this effort? It was a fair question, and Washington took a moment before answering. Officer Diaz, I could have filed a lawsuit. I probably would have won, as you said. But then what? The department would pay a settlement, issue a public apology, promise to do better, and nothing fundamental would change. The next person Powell pulled over might not have been a federal judge with resources and public standing. They might have been someone without a voice, without power. Washington stepped closer to the edge of the stage. I didn't want money or personal vindication. I wanted to use what happened to me to protect others who might not be able to protect themselves. That's why I became a judge in the first place, to uphold justice, especially for those who struggle to find it in our system. Officer Diaz nodded slowly, seeming to accept the answer. As he sat down, another officer stood. Officer Bryant, sir. I trained under Powell for 6 months when I joined the force. I saw things I didn't report because I was new and afraid for my job. Her voice shook slightly. I want to thank you for what you're doing, and I want to apologize for my silence. Washington hadn't expected this. A public acknowledgement, an officer breaking ranks to speak her truth. Your words matter, Officer Bryant, and it's never too late to stand for what's right. As the formal presentation ended and the interactive training began, Washington stepped back, allowing Captain Rodriguez to take the lead. The real work was just beginning. Changing a culture couldn't happen overnight or through policies alone. It would take continued effort, constant vigilance, and a commitment from everyone involved. Later that afternoon, Washington sat in his chambers, reviewing case files for the next day's hearings. A knock at his door revealed Luis, his clerk. Judge, there's someone here to see you. He doesn't have an appointment, but he says it's important. Washington glanced at his watch. He had a few minutes before his next meeting. Who is it? Officer Powell's son, sir. Washington paused, surprised. Show him in. A young man entered, mid-20s with a strong resemblance to the disgraced officer but with a very different bearing. Where Powell had been aggressive and intimidating, his son seemed thoughtful, almost hesitant. "Judge Washington, thank you for seeing me. My name is Thomas Powell." Washington gestured to a chair. "What can I do for you, Mr. Powell?" Thomas sat, clearly uncomfortable but determined. "I wanted to meet you to see for myself the man my father has been cursing for months." He looked directly at Washington. "And I wanted to apologize for what he did." "You're not responsible for your father's actions," Washington said gently. "No, but—" Thomas searched for the right words. "My father raised me with certain views about race, about who belongs where. I joined the military after high school, served with people from all backgrounds. I learned those views were wrong, but I never confronted him about it. Maybe if I had—" Washington shook his head. "Your father made his own choices just as you've made yours." Thomas nodded, then reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded application. "I've applied to the police academy, the new one, with your reforms in place. I want to be part of fixing what men like my father broke." Washington studied the young man, seeing sincerity in his eyes. "That won't be an easy path. Many will judge you by your name alone." "I know," Thomas acknowledged. "But someone needs to show that change is possible, even from within the families of those who resisted it most." As Thomas Powell left the chambers, Washington sat back in his chair, reflecting on how far things had come and how far they still had to go. The reforms were taking root, but sustainable change would require ongoing commitment from everyone involved: police, community members, officials, and ordinary citizens alike. His phone buzzed with a text from Captain Rodriguez. "Nationwide police reform bill just passed Senate committee. They're calling it the Washington Act. You've started something bigger than all of us." Washington smiled slightly. When Officer Powell had pulled him over that night, neither of them could have imagined where it would lead, to a transformation that was indeed shocking everyone, even those who had believed real change was impossible. The true shock wasn't in punishment or retribution. It was in the power of accountability to create healing, in the courage of those who spoke up after years of silence, and in the possibility that systems built on old injustices could be rebuilt with justice at their core. As Washington gathered his papers to head to his next hearing, he thought of something his father had told him years ago. True justice isn't just about making things right after they go wrong. It's about building a world where fewer things go wrong in the first place. For the first time in his long career, Judge Anthony Washington felt he might be helping to build exactly that.